And I'm really excited to announce that Skye Bruce is our newest, one of our newest staff members. She is our ecological monitoring coordinator and native plant coordinator. So excited and so fortunate to have Skye on staff as part of our team. Skye has a PhD in entomology, which she got from UW-Madison. And her research focus was butterfly conservation and ecology, so she's going to talk about that work tonight, on Wisconsin's protected and pastured grasslands. She's also previously worked as the coordinator for the Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative, and Skye lives on her family's vegetable and flower seed farm on Rush Creek, and she enjoys planting and maintaining new prairie patches around her own farm, and soon others in the nearby areas. She's jumping right into prairie planting with BSN. So I'll hand it over to you, Skye.
Thanks. All right, can everybody hear me through this? Still okay? All right. I can project too if need be. But thank you all so much for coming. I'm so excited to talk to you about butterflies in Wisconsin today. I hope you're all a fan of butterflies. It seems like we've got a bunch of folks here who are interested in learning more about their ecology and conservation. So thank you so much for being interested in that. I'll go through not only ecology and conservation, but I have added in a bonus section on a little bit of identification. We'll kind of speed through that. I added those slides just so that we have enough to fill out the hour, so we'll see what we can get to. But just to start out with ecology, I'm going to start with a topic that you may or may not be familiar with in this region, which is tallgrass prairie, one of the most endangered habitats in North America, if not the most endangered. Often people think it's forests, but actually grasslands are really quite rare. Historically, though, they covered a lot of central North America. You can see in the green here, this is the area where historical North American tallgrass prairies existed, and these are the habitats that are the best in terms of habitat for butterflies. So they have a lot of the host plants, which we'll go over, but they've and flowering plants, but they've drastically gone down in number. And here you'll see the remaining tallgrass prairies that we have, or remnant prairies that have been left over, are very, very few, and you can't even see on this graph where they are in Wisconsin. We have very, very few left, extremely low numbers here in Wisconsin. And you can see this original tallgrass prairie in 1866. We have a fraction of just these left over here. So this is kind of a blown up map of just Wisconsin and the tallgrass prairie here that was in Wisconsin previously, and just, I think it's less than 1% are left in Wisconsin still, and in North America.
But we're bringing them back.
We're trying to bring them back. So if you're doing the hard work and trying to plant those native species, good on you. So we have this historical tallgrass prairie habitat that supported so many species, and I just love this painting that illustrates all of these species that use tallgrass prairie as habitat and what makes a tallgrass prairie. So we have these two disturbance forces that historically created both grazing and burning in tallgrass prairie to keep tallgrass prairie. So we have in ecological succession, grassland eventually becomes forest if we don't have some type of disturbance. And this was usually in historical times either bison grazing grassland, keeping those shrubby and woody species out, or fires either started by people or by lightning strikes that are creating that disturbance, making sure that the woody species aren't creeping into the tallgrass prairie. And this type of disturbance is really suppressed these days. We no longer have any bison, at least in this area, and fires are fewer and far between unless they do like prescribed fires, which you've probably seen in this area too. But these, as I mentioned, less than 1% of original tallgrass prairie remains today. And what I mentioned earlier is that tallgrass prairie provides flowers and host plants for butterflies. So we can talk about flowers being food for adult butterflies. Many of you probably know butterflies need to land on flowers and nectar from them, sip that nectar, and that is energy that gives them energy to fuel their flight. But also their host plants, which is kind of an overlooked section of tallgrass prairie and that type of habitat. Host plants are food for larvae or caterpillars. So it's not just the flowers that matter, but it's actually the green stuff too. So leaves and stems of certain plants, butterflies cannot exist without. So you can think of like milkweed and monarchs. I'll go over more of that later, but just to give you the snapshot of why tallgrass prairie is important, it's important to understand this ecology of the ecosystem. So as I mentioned, burning, mowing, or grazing is important and required to keep these woody shrubs and trees from taking over prairie habitat. But timing and leaving what we call refugia is really key. And refugia is just these untouched patches. So if you're thinking about burning a prairie or mowing or grazing it, it's important that we leave some patches ungrazed or unburned, so that we have areas where those butterfly species are still able to exist, able to overwinter, and we can continue the ecology of that larger patch of prairie or pollinator area into the next year. So not only is it important to keep in mind location, but also timing there. So I want to go over one of the most familiar insects in North America to give you all not only a kind of baseline biology sense, but also give you this other perspective on host plants and pollinator flowering plants, nectaring plants, so that you can see how this all fits together. So many of you probably know monarch butterflies. We're going to just go through the life cycle. You may have seen this in your school classrooms, but it's important to just remember this as we go through this talk. So monarch butterflies rely on milkweed. This is a photo of common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. They require this milkweed to grow their larvae. So they will lay their eggs only on milkweed. There are many species of milkweed, and this is just one, but as its name suggests, it is the most common one. So first the egg will appear on the plants. That egg will turn into a larva or a caterpillar. And that caterpillar will form a J shape when it's eaten enough milkweed to pupate or become a chrysalis. So then it'll become a pupa, and then it will, what we call eclose into, or exit its chrysalis and become an adult. It hangs upside down. The fluid in its wings is driven down through the wings, and it pumps up its wings. And so when it's this adult butterfly, then it relies on nectar plants, flowering plants of all kinds, not just milkweed. So milkweed only flowers for one portion of the season. Monarchs need flowering plants that bloom across the season, both in the spring and in the fall, to fuel their flight, primarily because this is a migratory species. They're doing most of their flying at the beginning and at the end, so on the shoulders of the season. So it's really important that we recognize that not only are they reliant on milkweed, but they actually are also reliant on other species that bloom across the season to fuel their migration. And again, not just milkweed, but they can nectar from milkweed, but all flowering species here. So I'm going to go over a few of the things next that pollinators need to thrive. We'll come back to monarchs. But monarchs are going to give you this overall idea of kind of what is a host plant versus what is a nectaring plant. And that comes into play here too. So what do pollinators need to thrive? They require food, both in the form of nectar, so from flowers, but also host plants, which we've talked about. Shelter. So you might not think of butterflies needing shelter, but they do require periods of shelter, particularly when they are vulnerable in their larval stages and in their chrysalis stage. So it's important to consider that they also need shelter, but all pollinators need shelter at some point in their lives. And then lastly, they need non-toxic habitat. These are the three big things that pollinators need to thrive. So if you're providing these things, great. Non-toxic habitat, what I mean by this is the lack of insecticide sprayed primarily, but also you can think of this in terms of herbicide too. Herbicide takes out their host plant, takes out their nectaring plants, so important that we're not spraying habitat that we need to support pollinators. So in terms of food, I've already kind of gone over some of this, but we need food as in nectar for butterflies, for adults, and then food as in host plants for larvae. And we'll come back to this again and again throughout this talk. But just to go over, we've talked about monarchs in terms of they are a migratory species. There are actually other migratory species in Wisconsin that are technically not here year-round. I don't know which one's more surprising, that butterflies make it here in their migration, or that there are some that actually spend year-round here, but really cool to think about both. So in terms of migratory species, we have the monarch, which we all know. Less commonly known are red admirals, painted ladies, fiery skippers, and the common buckeye, which is shown here. So really cool to think about these species that come up in the spring usually, and then either migrate back to other habitat to farther south in the fall, or they die here and then the southern populations repopulate in the spring. But monarch, for instance, goes both ways. We also have overwintering butterflies in Wisconsin, and these are often the first butterflies to be spotted in the spring. So if you see a butterfly in the spring, it's most likely one of these species. It could be others, but the first butterflies that I usually spot in the spring are the mourning cloak, shown here, which actually it can overwinter as an adult. And I get the question, how do they survive? Where do they go? They go usually under logs, under leaves, in little nooks and crannies in the woods, and they just hunker down there, and they're ectothermic, so they don't, increase their body temperature. They lower their body temperature a lot, and they have this natural antifreeze in their veins, basically. But so we also have the eastern comma, Compton's tortoiseshell, and the spring azure, which overwinters as a chrysalis. So butterflies can overwinter as eggs, pupa, caterpillars, or adults. So or chrysalis. So at every stage, depending on the species, they can overwinter here in Wisconsin, which is just really cool, because we know it gets really cold here. And we like to talk about the ecological niches of butterflies too. I get the question a lot, why butterflies? Why do you care? Well, not only are they beautiful and so fun to ID and look at and find, but they also function as food for so many other species, namely birds, but also wasps, spiders, frogs, lizards, and small mammals. These they're usually prey in terms of when they are caterpillars, but they can also be prey at other life stages too. So eggs are often eaten by other insects. Chrysalises can be found and eaten depending on the species. And then birds will also often eat adult butterflies. And then in terms of where they're found, usually we think of them found in open grasslands, but butterflies can also be found in forests or sandy areas. Really, it's dependent on where their host plants are. So if you want a butterfly to come to you, it's a good idea to provide its host plants. This will come back again. So just a quick poll the audience. I'm curious if anyone knows how many butterfly species have been recorded in Wisconsin. You can take a guess. This is just a few from wisconsinbutterflies.org, pictures I pulled. Any guesses? So there's 40 in this photo, but there's more than that, I'll tell you that.
120.
We got 120, 142, 300, 400. It's somewhere in the middle of those guesses. It's 162 species we have in Wisconsin. And that number usually surprises people. We have a lot of species. I mean, just looking at the diversity here, we just have so many cool species, and obviously some are more common than others. But it's really fun if you are someone who likes to go butterflying, as we call it. You can join Southern Wisconsin Butterfly Association and come on field trips with us. It's a lot of fun to walk around and try and check off these butterflies on our life list. It's a lot like birding. If anybody goes birding, you can also have a life list for butterflies. Especially taking photos is really fun, but just fun to see them. So the answer here is 162. So I told you I would sneak in some slides about identification just because I think that this is really fun, but we will go through this part hopefully rather quickly so that I can get through it. So we're going to go over what are lepidopterans, which are moths and butterflies, how to identify moths versus butterflies, and we'll look at some families in Wisconsin, butterfly families, and some common IDs. So what are lepidopterans? Butterflies and moths are lepidopterans. This is a classification of insects with their name meaning scale wing. So lepidos is scale and pteron, the P is silent, is wing. So these scales that butterflies have are actually specially modified flattened hairs, or what we call in entomology seedy. They also are characterized by having a proboscis, which is a coilable straw to consume liquid food. So we know that they consume nectar. As an adult, all of the lepidopterans have proboscises. And butterflies evolved from within moths. So butterflies are technically a group of day-flying moths. So it's important to recognize moths as an overall family, but of course butterflies are the shiny day-flying ones, so we see them more and often know more about them in a lot of ways. So again, continued here, we have a little bit about caddisflies I'm going to skip through, but also sawflies are kind of similar. Their caterpillars are really, really similar, but when you're identifying them out in the field, caterpillars of butterflies have more than 5 pairs of prolegs. And then larvae of some lady beetles are similar. I'm going to kind of skip through some of this actually. But so there's a lot of other insects is the point here that can be mistaken for butterflies and moths, including moth flies, white flies, pleasing lacewings, and plant hoppers. So how to tell the difference between a moth and a butterfly? It's actually all in the antennae. Butterflies have thin, straight, and long antennae with club-like tips, whereas moths have feathery, thick, comb-like antennae for the males. This is a male moth here, or tapered antennae like the female moths. So we're looking for that thin antennae but clubbed at the tip in terms of how we can identify a butterfly. That's often really hard to do in the field when they're moving around or they're really small, so which is why, one reason why entomologists capture and pin butterflies, but you can do it, and you can also it just takes practice doing it outside and on the wing, as we say. But so you can see this is a moth. It doesn't have a clubbed tip at the end, and it just has these antennae that are rather thin. We have these parts of a butterfly diagrams here that I'm not going to go through, but you can see again the antennae here that are thin with the clubbed tip. So when you are IDing butterflies, it's really important to keep in mind actually a number of characteristics. We can think about looking at size of the butterfly, the shape, the flight pattern, and the context in which you're finding them. It's really helpful to have all of these pieces of context in order to be able to ID your butterfly and tell apart species. Also important, not only the context, the location, but also phenology, which is the study of the timing of recurring biological events. So some butterflies you're going to see in the beginning of the season. I talked about some of those first appearing butterflies in the spring, and some of them you might only see later on in the season. Some you might see in the middle of the season. So it's important to understand where we are in terms of the timing of the season to be able to identify your butterflies. So I've already talked about some of these first butterflies to appear in Wisconsin. These are listed by actually what's been found on Wisconsin butterflies by folks that are out there looking for them. So we have the eastern comma, mourning cloak, Compton's tortoiseshell, cabbage white, Milbert's tortoiseshell, the gray comma, the red admiral, the spring azure, and the Olympia marble, and then lastly the American lady. I really like this book. If you're interested in learning more about butterflies of Wisconsin, Butterflies of the North Woods is great. I mentioned that I have, information coming up here about the 6 butterfly families in Wisconsin, and I'm mostly just going to flash through these and show you. I have a longer course that I teach in the summers where I go through more ID, and it's a very similar presentation to this, but I get even more into identification. But this is a great resource if you're out there looking for butterflies and you want to be able to ID in the field. So the 6 butterfly families in Wisconsin, we'll start with the swallowtails, we'll look at the whites and the sulfurs. Then we have the gossamer winged butterflies, which are my personal favorite. These are the hair streaks, blues, and harvesters. We have the meadowlarks, which are a very small family in Wisconsin. We have only 1 species. Brushfoots, which are things like monarchs. Skippers, which move really fast, and there's a ton of them, and they're really hard to ID. And so we'll start going through these. I'll just breeze through these a little bit so you get just an idea of the amount of diversity we have here in Wisconsin. I told you there are 162 species, and you're actually going to see them all flash on the screen here. So these are the swallowtails. I'm also going to show in blue boxes what you might be likely to observe in this area, and you might have already seen. So you'll see some familiar friends here. But black swallowtails, eastern tiger swallowtails, and giant swallowtails are what you're most likely to see here. Often people know eastern tiger swallowtails really well. We have, I talked about host plants for monarchs. Host plants are something that all butterfly species have. Some are generalists and they feed on lots of different species of host plants, and some are specialists, like monarchs, only feeding on milkweed. So for swallowtails, some of the host plants that you might find them on are dill in your garden, or fennel, or parsley, or rue. But a native species that you can plant for swallowtails is golden Alexander. And they also rely on many tree species. So you're often going to see these butterflies, these swallowtails in the woods. They like to, as caterpillars, eat the leaves of ash trees, cottonwoods, tulip poplars, wild black cherries, willows, and other members of the magnolia family and the rosaceae family. I also think it's really cool that this family of butterflies has this characteristic called an osmeterium, which is this foul-smelling organ that they, behind their head, which they eject when they feel threatened. It's this orange thing. And osmeteriums are usually these bright colors. I think I have a video here that I took on our farm. I think it will play. Oh yeah, it will. So I'm just poking this and you can see it shoot its osmeterium out. And if you were there, you would smell a little bit of a stinky odor. So yeah, that's the osmeterium in action. This is a little bit about tiger swallowtails and their light and dark morphs. We see so many tiger swallowtails, and I just think it's cool that this is one of the only butterflies in Wisconsin that actually has a light morph and a dark morph. And the dark morph is very similar to a lot of other species. So I like to point that out for people in case they're interested in IDing them. And I'm not going to quite go through all of the 4 similar species, but I'll just tell you this is a dark morph tiger swallowtail. And if you're interested, I can send you the presentation. But you can see they're very similar to the black swallowtail. This is the pipevine swallowtail, and this is the spicebush swallowtail, which I've never seen the spicebush in Wisconsin, but it is here. And then we have the giant swallowtails, which, just to highlight this species as well, this is the largest butterfly in the US, and we have it here, which is really, really cool. It's huge, it's yellow and black, just a gorgeous species. This is the giant swallowtail compared to the eastern tiger swallowtail on the left. So you can see it's quite a large species. Next we have the whites and the sulfurs. You might recognize the cabbage white. It's in your garden, it's eating your cabbage, it's eating your kale. It is quite the pest. And it's not a native species, but we observe it quite a bit in Wisconsin, so very common. In terms of the whites and the sulfurs, this is the sulfurs. You might see a clouded sulfur or an orange sulfur floating around. The clouded sulfurs feed on alfalfa, so we have, that's the ones you'll see the clouds of species, of this species. And the clouded sulfur is, I believe it's a non-native species. The orange sulfur is a native species, so likely to observe both of those. Next we have the gossamer winged butterflies, which are the hair streaks, blues, and harvesters. not a ton of common species here, but American copper and bronze copper are some that you might see. The harvesters, there's only one species in Wisconsin, and they're found usually in woodland habitat. They're really rare, but they're really unique butterflies in that their caterpillars are actually carnivorous. Some of the only carnivorous species. They feed on woolly aphids in the woods. They're less common in the south, so we really don't have them here. But others in the hairstreak family here, you might see are the coral hairstreak and the banded hairstreak, really cool, fast flying species. You can see how similar these species are too. So if you want to learn more how to ID, join one of our butterfly groups and we'll show you how. But also in this group are the blues, my personal favorite. You might see little blue butterfly floating around. The blue is on the upper side of its wings, and it's often an eastern-tailed blue. In the springtime, you might see a spring azure. They've come up in this presentation a bit before. And in the middle of the summer, if you're seeing a blue butterfly that doesn't have these really tiny little tails, it's probably a summer azure. So you can see these tails blown up a little bit on this slide. This is an eastern-tailed blue. If you're seeing a blue butterfly with tails, it is going to be an eastern-tailed blue. Their host plants are a variety of plants in the pea family, including cowvetch, clover, alfalfa, lupin, lead plant, Canada tick trefoil, and round-headed bush clover, and wild pea. Very similar is the spring azure. I really love to tell people to plant New Jersey tea. It's a great host plant for this species if you want to see more spring azures or summer azures. Summer azures are very similar, but what differentiates those two species is the timing. So if you're seeing one that's very similar, without the tails, but it's got the blue, it just depends on the timing, whether it's a summer or a spring azure. Next we have the Karner blue, which is an endangered species in Wisconsin. Unfortunately, we don't have them around here, but if you go to the central area of Wisconsin and you go to a pine barren, so an area that's cleared around a pine forest, you might see a Karner blue. Their host plant is sundial lupin. And really important here when we're talking about this host plant that we're getting the right species. I think I have it here, yeah. The wild lupin is very, very similar to the large-leaved lupin, which is a non-native, really quite invasive species. So if you have lupin in your yard, I really recommend double checking it and making sure it's this native wild lupin, also known as sundial lupin. The way that you can tell them apart is looking at the number of leaflets and the leaflet size. So large-leaved lupin is what you'll see all over the like Madeline Island area, and a lot of folks think that that's a native lupin. Unfortunately, it isn't. It just spreads really, really fast because it's this invasive species. But the large-leaf lupin has 9 to 7 leaflets versus in our wild lupin, 9 to 11 leaflets. It's a lot taller, and its leaflets are 1 inch wide or larger. If you want to know where you can get wild lupin seeds, the native species, I recommend going to Prairie Moon or one of our local Wisconsin nurseries. Even better if you can find one in our local Wisconsin nurseries. But yeah, I really recommend that you're planting the right one because our native butterflies will not use the large-leaved species. So it's kind of unfortunate, and it's definitely a misunderstanding, I guess. I love to see lupin, but I really, when I see it, I hope it's this native species. It will also hybridize, which is not good. So, because once it's hybridized, those seeds will become plants that those native butterflies also cannot use. So really important here to make sure you've got the right lupin. I mentioned meadowlarks. The only species of meadowlark that we have in Wisconsin is the swamp meadowlark. This is also a really favorite species of mine, and there's very, very few in our state. When we go on field trips to try and find this species, there's usually fewer than 3 individuals at a site, and there's about 3 sites left in Wisconsin. It utilizes calcareous fens, and its host plant is swamp thistle. So really specific habitat. It's a really small butterfly. I would say it's probably smaller than a penny. It looks really big on here, but it's really small, and it's got these beautiful metallic, they look like metallic threads running through the wings here on the margins. So just a gorgeous species. If you're lucky enough to see it in person, I really recommend it. I mentioned the brushfoots. There's a lot of subfamilies that I'm going to breeze through here, but I told you it includes the monarchs. Brushfoots, we'll start off with the American snout, which is just a really funny species. It's got this long nose or rostrum. Also included in the brushfoots are our fritillaries. We see a lot of these in this area, mostly meadow fritillary, which is down here, but also great spangled fritillaries, which are quite a large species and look a lot like monarchs when they're flying fast. Great spangled fritillaries, again, we have here, their host plants are violets. So great idea to plant violets or not rip them out of your yard if you have them, because they support our fritillaries. Also in our brushfoots is the subfamily true brushfoots, which we have we call them the punctuation mark butterflies, the question marks and the commas. You're likely to see, and also the pearl crescents you're likely to see. They're a very small butterfly fluttering. They're still around. They're about to not be around because it's going to freeze tonight, but they are common throughout the year, or throughout the growing season. I mentioned punctuation mark butterflies, eastern comma, and question marks. We can identify these. Actually, you have to get pretty close or take a photo. That's the best way. But you can see this question mark, silver marking here, and this one forms a comma. It's just a really small marking on the dorsal view of their wings, so you got to look close there. Also wanted to highlight the Baltimore checker spot, a really cool species that you can plant turtlehead and marsh betony to support. It likes wet areas, just like where its host plants are found, and it's just got these gorgeous orange and black markings. Next, just more true brushfoots. A few that you're likely to see are highlighted in blue here. Talked about mourning cloak a little bit. You're likely to see that in the spring, but it also flies throughout the growing season. And then we have the American lady, the painted lady, the red admiral, and the common buckeye. Highlighting the red admiral here. Another plant that you might think is a little bit of a pest, fun to eat in the spring when it's young, is nettles. And red admirals also consume nettles as caterpillars, so a good reason to keep nettles around. Last year, red admirals had a banner year. If you saw them flying around, it was wild. And then we have the painted ladies and the American ladies. If you're interested in IDing them, it's this one little spot, this white spot that doesn't occur on the painted ladies to differentiate the American ladies. Very tiny identification tip there. And then we have the common buckeyes. These are generalists. This is a good example of a generalist butterfly. So as caterpillars, they can eat a lot of different species. Monkey flowers, blue vervain, thistles, yarrow, pearly everlasting, hollyhock, and mallows. A few more brushfoots that you might see commonly in this area are red-spotted purples and viceroys. Viceroys very similar to monarchs. And then last subfamily of brushfoots are the leaf wings. You're very unlikely to see a leaf wing in Wisconsin, but I included it nonetheless. Next subfamily is emperors. We have tawny emperors and hackberry emperors. I see a lot of hackberry emperors around here later in the season. Their host plant is hackberry. Next brushfoot subfamily is satyrs. Little wood satyrs and common wood nymphs are common around here. They feed on grasses and sedges. So there are a lot of butterflies who feed on grasses and sedges, particularly little and big blue stems, so you'll see that coming up more too. Then of course we have the monarchs, and this is the subfamily of their own. If you want to know how to identify monarchs versus viceroys, look for this black line going through the bottom wing, and that is how you can differentiate them. Viceroys have that black line running through them. But again, monarchs feed on milkweed, so important to keep that around. Skippers, I mentioned they're our largest family, so I'm really going to skip through these, but these are grasses and sedges as their host plants, including little and big blue stem here. There's 3 subfamilies of skippers: the spreadwing skippers, the skipperlings, and the grass skippers. So let's see how quickly I can go through here. A couple common species you might see are silver-spotted skippers and juveniles. Dusky wing here. This is the spread-wing skippers. The Arctic skipper you're unlikely to see. And then we have a ton in the grass skipper subfamily. You're likely to see a leaf skipper, a fiery skipper, and a peck skipper in this area, but you can see how similar these species are. They're tricky for even well-seasoned butterflyers to ID. Northern broken dashes are another skipper species you're likely to see here. And yeah, these are all kind of you're unlikely to see, so we'll skip through those. But looking at one common species I see a lot around here, this is peck skipper. You can see they have kind of marking in the shape of an X. We call it Peck's X. That's what helps us ID the pecks. They have these X-shaped lighter markings, and they use cut grass, bluegrass, and brome grasses as their host plants. So not only are flowering species important, but we see it really commonly in butterflies that grasses are super important. How am I doing on time? Anybody have time?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. Fiery skippers are very similar too. We can see that these fiery skippers have fewer markings, and they are this bright orange color. I've been seeing them the past week or so, but they're pretty common throughout the latter half of the season. They use Kentucky bluegrass as host plants, bent grasses, and crabgrasses, so even some of those pesky grass species are useful here for fiery skippers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you can contribute. Hopefully you've been kind of absorbing all of these native plant species, and you can get some ideas for what you can plant in your gardens to support butterflies. But you can also think about contributing to citizen science efforts and get help with your IDs by recording your butterfly observations. So this is something really fun that I like to do and other people around Wisconsin like to do, using a couple different technologies, one of which is the iNaturalist app, perhaps the easiest way to observe your observations. I just love this. Seek is also an app that is a part of iNaturalist, so if you're using Seek, that information, those data can be used. But iNaturalist I think is even better because it gives you a catalog of all of the species that you've seen. Kind of looks like this. You make an observation, iNaturalist's AI will ID it, but then an expert will come in and confirm the ID, and then it can be used as data in research projects. So I know many scientists who actually will use these observations from citizen scientists in their research and write papers about where these species exist. Another really useful website is wisconsinbutterflies.org. I think that this is way more personal. It's a little bit more involved submitting your observation because you have to go on the website. You can't just do it on your phone, but it's well worth it because you have Mike Reese, who runs the website, is a wealth of knowledge. He's just a wonderful resource, and he himself will confirm your ID if he's not on vacation or something. He'll go in and see your observation, and your information will be added to the website that you saw this species at this time in this location. And if it's a really cool species, you might get an email from Mike that says, this is the first observation of this species in this area, or this is a really exciting thing. So it's a little bit more personal than iNaturalist, and it's much more local. But essentially, you can submit your observation on wisconsinbutterflies.org, and it'll come up under the recent sightings. And then, let's see, there's also, you can look, this is a really useful website in terms of looking and seeing which species you have in your county. So you can click on your county, go down and click on Vernon County, and then you can see a list of species that have been found here. So if you're curious which species you found, it's going to be on that list, unless it's really unusual. But most of the time it's going to be on that list for your county. So this is, for example, butterfly species of Dane County, and you can go down and see, if it's on that list. Confirm or change your observation. So next section is into conservation. I'm going to get into a little bit of what I've done in terms of my research at UW-Madison, and also just some larger research pieces about butterflies. And one of these is the SLOSS debate. The SLOSS debate stands for single large or several small patches of habitat. So is it better to be planting a single large patch of habitat for butterflies or several small patches of habitat for butterflies? And you may not think this matters, but for butterfly species and for conservation and land managers, this really does matter, because we want to know from a conservation perspective where we should be putting these pieces of habitat. We'd want to be able to place these pieces of habitat in spots where they will be used. And for some butterfly species, they require really large swaths of habitat because they aren't good at moving across areas of non-habitat. Other butterfly species like monarchs, I guess I'm kind of blowing the punchline a little bit here, but monarchs are really good at traversing areas of non-habitat, and so planting several small patches of habitat can actually be a really good way for people to band together and put patches in their yard, and monarchs will come and find it. So, as I mentioned, strong flyers and bigger butterflies are those that are usually able to traverse longer distances and take advantage of these small patches of habitat, even when those patches are isolated. But small butterflies are really affected by this ratio of the perimeter to area of habitat. So they need larger swaths of habitat if they're smaller and they're less good at flying, essentially. Monarchs specifically, going to go through a little bit about them. This is where we are right now with this. So currently, monarchs are actually not listed as endangered in the US. This is kind of another misunderstanding about monarchs. There are very few of them. We'll look at the population levels, but they're not listed as endangered in the US. They're in the process of being listed as threatened, but the US Fish and Wildlife decision is probably going to come out December 4th, but also probably it's going to be postponed. There's a lot going on with the federal government right now, and they aren't sure whether this is going to be postponed yet, but I'm thinking it's probably going to be postponed from the people that I've been talking to. The IUCN, which is an international designation for conservation of nature, has listed monarchs as endangered previously, but then they recently switched to threatened. So this is where some of the confusion comes from. The IUCN doesn't give national federal protections because it's an international designation. There's no federal protections for monarchs as it stands. So just wanted to clear that up. I get questions a lot about this. But in terms of how we assess, I've kind of talked about sloths, but we can study these organisms, all monarchs, and land management on local scales and on landscape scales. And that's some of the work that I did in my PhD, which was really exciting, looking at monarchs both in terms of what they need in a single patch of habitat, but also what they need in terms of a landscape scale of view. We weren't sure. We had a hypothesis that monarchs could use these small patches of habitat, but we weren't sure if they were really finding them, and so that's a lot of the work that I did at UW-Madison. But to give you kind of also a background here of monarchs and what's been threatening them, we know that the monarch decline is strongly associated with the loss of milkweed from our landscape. I've drilled it home here that milkweed is associated with monarchs, and because we've lost so much of it from our landscape, we've lost a lot of monarchs. We know that changing herbicide regimes have made cropland unsuitable monarch habitat. Many of you probably know there used to be so much milkweed in corn and soy fields. Milkweed actually loves tillage. It loves to be broken apart and clonally spread. And once herbicide GMO crops came to be, milkweed really disappeared from these areas. We also actually know that we need 1.3 billion additional milkweed stems in the Midwest by 2038 to restore the monarch population. And this is a ton of stems of milkweed. So this is the reason that my research was important. We wanted to make sure that we were planting these stems in places where monarchs could access them. Otherwise, we were wasting resources, wasting milkweed, wasting energy, and we wanted to be able to make sure that monarchs were using them. So that was kind of the premise for this paper that I wrote with my advisors on landscape and local variables affecting monarchs in Midwest grasslands. You can see down here at the bottom, we surveyed patches of habitat, so areas of grassland with milkweed, and compared monarchs at these numbers of monarchs, both egg, caterpillar, and adults, to areas with patches with high grassland in the surrounding 10 kilometers. And we just looked at whether one of these categories had more monarchs or fewer. And we actually found that monarchs love to hang out in these areas with low grassland, and they actually will congregate in these really isolated patches of grassland and hang out and use that milkweed and then go on to another patch. So essentially it's a if you build it they will come model for milkweed and monarchs. Flowers are really important too though. I didn't talk about that here, but it's also really important to plant flowers other than milkweeds. This slide is showing you Wisconsin's milkweeds. I told you there's more than just common milkweed. We actually have 12 species of milkweed in Wisconsin, which is really cool. Some are more common than others. Obviously common milkweed is super common here. Rose milkweed or swamp milkweed is really common in wet areas. And then we have butterfly weed, which is also a common species, and it gives us that bright orange color in the prairies. I love seeing butterfly weed out there. But there's a bunch of other species of milkweeds, and if you're interested in what will, I get the question, which species should I plant? Which ones do monarchs like the most? They like the ones that are going to do the best in the soil and the sun exposure that you have in your yard. So you can look, I love this resource, it's from wimonarchs.org, this organization I used to work for, Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative. It shows you first of all, whether it's threatened or endangered species, but also whether it needs full or part sun, what kind of drainage and moisture the soil should have for that milkweed, and when it blooms. So if you can get your hands on the seed that will grow best in your habitat, that's the milkweed that you should grow. A monarch just wants a healthy milkweed stem. It doesn't really matter which species. They will lay their eggs on all of them. The only thing that you should avoid is planting non-native tropical milkweed. This is Asclepias crasivaca, and it is commonly sold at places like Walmart and Home Depot, and it can interfere with the monarch's ability to migrate and reproduce. So this is even more of an issue in the southern states, but this is sold here. So just be aware if you're buying milkweed from, well, I hope you don't buy it from a big box store. I hope you buy it from a small local nursery. But if you are there and you're just really tempted to buy it, make sure it's not tropical milkweed. There's some really cool research on this from the Xerces Society too, but this is a non-native species. This is a tough subject, but Xerces Society has come out with a lot of really interesting research on why captive rearing monarchs is not the best way to help them. And I just want to point out that you can still help them by planting milkweed. And it's not the worst thing in the world if you want to rear a few monarchs throughout the season. That's totally fine. I've had people come up to me and tell me they've raised hundreds of monarchs in a season, and I'm like, oh, that's cool, but that's also not cool. It brings a really high risk for disease. You can see how many caterpillars are in a small enclosure like this especially, and just like people, when we gather, there's a higher risk of transfer of germs, essentially. But there is also evidence to suggest that captive rearing monarchs interferes with their ability to migrate. They really need to be outdoors in their local ecosystem and habitat. Being able to sense the sun is particularly important for monarchs, both how long the day is and where in orientation in space they are. So really important that we don't rear captive monarchs in mass and that we're planting milkweed instead. Also just wanted to point out that we have several butterfly species on Wisconsin's endangered and threatened species list. Swamp meadowlark we've already gone over, the Atto skipper, northern blue butterfly, the Powesheik skipperling, the regal fritillary, and the frosted elfin are all endangered species. So there are some species to keep an eye on, and if you see them, it's extra cool. Also, the Carner blue is federally endangered, and again, the monarchs and the regal fritillary are under consideration for a threatened listing. So, if you haven't gotten the idea already, it's a great idea to find your favorite butterfly species and plant their host plants. This is a great thing to do if you're planting seed in the fall, or if you want to be planting actual plugs or plants, transplants in the spring. Find their host plants at a local nursery and plant those. And then also, it's important to plant a mix of native flowering species and host plant species, but these flowering species that bloom at different times throughout the growing season so that you're feeding butterflies across the entire season. These are just a few species that I like to highlight that are kind of early, mid, and late bloomers. We have tickseed, wild lupin, which we've talked a lot about, smooth penstemon, all bloom early. In the middle of the season, we have coneflower, bergamot, and cup plant. And in the late season, goldenrod, particularly showy goldenrod, I think I have a photo of it in here. And then New England aster we've just seen blooming, and then field thistle is really great, actually, for butterflies. And then we already talked about this, but non-toxic habitat, super important to not be spraying. Systemic pesticides especially can just really take hold in the plant and affect a plant throughout the season. So important that we're not spraying, particularly avoiding neonicotinoids. This is a class of insecticides that have direct mortality at high concentration, but they also, in lower concentration, can affect growth and development, navigation, and a lot of other behaviors, even at really low concentrations. And these safe thresholds are really unknown. And so neonicotinoids are also found in plants at big box stores, which is just another reason to find a small local nursery to buy from. So eliminating insecticide use wherever and whenever possible is a great thing to do for our butterflies. If you want to look into some butterfly conservation organizations, I mentioned the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They are the nationwide organization to look into, and you can join in their efforts, but they have some really great resources for planting habitat. We have the Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative, which is the previous organization that I worked for. The Southern Wisconsin Butterfly Association that hosts field trips if you're interested in getting out there with us. It's our local chapter of the North American Butterfly Association. We have Friends of the Monarch Trail, which is more in the western side of our state, and the Monarch Joint Venture, which is a national group focused on monarch conservation. They are like the monarch umbrella organization in the United States. So I've mentioned a little bit about Wisconsin Monarch Collaborative. They have that really great Wisconsin milkweeds handout, but they also have some other general resources that are great to check out if you want more handouts and things like that to share or to read yourself. You can, I've already mentioned this, explore native butterflies and record your own observations at wisconsinbutterflies.org. And then another resource that's nice is on the pollinators.wis.edu habitat guide. It's /habitat, but you can get on there and look at, again, what does a healthy pollinator habitat look like, which goes over a lot of what I've showed you here, but it's another great resource and presentation. The Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation locally has a Great Lakes Region Pollinator Resource Center where you can go and get help with habitat assessment, installation, plant lists, pesticide protection, and ID and monitoring. So a really great resource there. And then some in-person community science opportunities is monitoring with Southern Wisconsin Butterfly Association. You can do monarch tagging. There's usually several different organizations hosting monarch tagging and monarch monitoring. I think I have, yeah, this is just a really big, this is from Monarch Joint Venture, a really big handout on finding which monarch community science program is right for you based on what interests you in terms of if you're interested in looking at milkweed, caterpillars, or adults, what kind of time you can spend, whether it's 15 minutes or an hour or days, where you're located, when can you participate within the season, so spring, summer, fall, what you would like to do, and then which program is associated with all of these factors. So it's a really great resource to find out how you can work with monarchs specifically and contribute to that. But you can advocate for butterflies. You can do the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, advocate for the signing of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. You can support organic farmers. You can lobby for anti-insecticide legislation, both locally, state level, and federally. You can boycott neonicotinoid-treated plants. Again, those are mostly from big box stores. And you can talk to local nursery operators about supplying more native host plants and decreasing or avoiding pesticide use. It's a great conversation to have if you're buying plants. And you can share this information with others. So the more that we share this information, the more we can make a difference. I think that's all I have. This email is old, I'm sorry. But I'm happy to take questions here.